Welcome to this panel focused on grain changers. I want to turn it over to Allison to introduce the panel and get us started.
Thank you so much. And you forgot to introduce yourself. That's Anna Muley. She is the executive
I always
director
do that.
of Slow Food USA. She's kind of shy, I've decided, but good for you. Anyway, so
not shy, just
everybody.
don't need attention.
I just want to give a quick reminder about how the sessions work before we get started. And the first thing is that if you have any questions or comments, please put them into the chat. We will be taking those questions out and saving them towards the end for the panel part of this particular discussion. So go ahead and put those in. Sometimes some of the other presenters may even answer them in the chat. The second thing is that even though when you arrive here, it's asking you to share your audio and your video, please don't click to do that, because only the presenters in the panel are going to be on screen during this particular presentation. At the end of the day, we have breakout sessions. So when the panels and presentations are done, there is an opportunity to go out and network with people in the sessions area. And those are open like 24/7 the whole time that this weekend session is live, or the whole event is live. So you can come in early before the sessions start or stay late until afterwards to network with other people. And you can actually make your own session based on whatever theme it is that you might be interested in. So feel free to use the sessions to do that. That's how we'll be meeting other people and getting to know each other here in the Seed Summit. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm just going to go ahead and introduce Andrew. He is our coordinator for this particular session, and I'm going to read his fancy bio. And Andrew is Dr. Andrew Calabrese is a professor of media studies and the associate dean for research and graduate programs at the University of Colorado's College of Media, Communications, and Information. His research and publishing are about media and social movements, communication rights, and the politics of human need. His recent work focuses on the intersections of media and food politics, including matters of public knowledge about food, food sovereignty, barriers to access to healthy and culturally appropriate food, risk factors associated with food production and consumption, and the class politics of pleasure as they relate to food policy. He serves on the board of the Colorado Grain Chain, which is a nonprofit organization, and going to be mostly the focus of what we're talking about today. A lot of the people in this session are part of that Colorado Grain Chain. And so I'm going to go ahead. He's also the producer of the film that we're about to see, which is a clip from a film that he's working on right now. It's sort of a work in progress, and that'll introduce the idea. And then we'll come back on, and each of our presenters you see on screen right now will be giving a short talk about sort of their piece in their local grain chain.
We are indeed a privileged group of people in that not everybody gets to have the kind of grain chains that we're advocating here, but we want them to be available to wider populations. And we think that this is a model for how grain should be produced in the future, and hopefully more regional and local and regional grain chains will pop up around the country. Jeremy is going to talk a bit about the case of grain chains in Europe. And I know that the panel that David Shields is moderating after we're done with our session will also address grain chains. So I'm looking forward to that. I'd like to just get started right away with introductions to the panelists. And let me see, is everyone here? Are we missing anyone? Nope. Looks like we're all here. Okay, so first, Nana Meyer is Associate Professor of Human Physiology and Nutrition and founder of the Grain School Project at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. She's worked in Olympic sport nutrition for 20 years, supporting U.S. athletes at 5 Olympic Games, while helping to found professional sport nutrition organizations nationally and internationally. Her time is now focused on sustainable food systems in the Rocky Mountain region. I should note that I'm a board member of the founding board member of the Colorado Grain Chain, as are Andy Clark and Mona Esposito, president of the Colorado Grain Chain. And Nana played a huge role in helping to launch the Colorado Grain Chain. I think we wouldn't have gotten the big boost that we have right now if it hadn't been for Nana and her partner, Dan Hobbs. Nana's also the founder director of Grain School, a major international event that I think she'll be able to tell you more about. She's also a farmer who trials grain varieties with her organic farmer husband, Dan. Jeremy Cherfas appears in the film. Someone just said they can't hear me. Can panelists raise your hand if you hear me? Okay, so it's just one person. All right, I'll get back to the introductions. Jeremy Cherfas is the producer of Eat This Podcast, and if you don't know it, you really should try it. He delivers incredible value in his podcasts on the science, the history, the culture of food, and he's done many podcasts on grain, and he's here to tell us about the case of European grain chains. Tristan Noyce is executive director of the Maine Grain Alliance, which is one of the leading regional grain hubs in the country. They do grain trials and share seed with farmers. They also promote grain farming, milling, baking, malting, and everything else associated with the culinary uses of grains. Maine Grain Alliance also runs an important annual event that brings together all sorts of farmers, bakers, millers, maltsters, and other artisans connected to the building of local regional grain economies, called the Kneading Conference. And it's a wonderful event. It was depicted briefly in the film highlights that I showed you. Mona Esposito is also goes by the name The Grain Lady. She's co-founder of the Noble Grain Alliance, a nonprofit aimed at restoring heritage grains to Colorado. She also was as I mentioned, founding board member of the Colorado Grain Chain. She works with growers, chefs, bakers, consumers as a heritage grain consultant. And she's an avid baker and been one for many years, and is passionate about the 100% use of 100% heritage whole grains in her baking, and she's an advocate of superior nutrition and flavor that you find in whole grains. Andy Clark is a heritage grain baker and owner of Moxie Bread Co., which was just named by Food and Wine magazine as one of the top 10 bakeries in the country. Andy is also a miller and a part-time farmer who has been growing turkey red wheat here in Boulder County. He's the current chair of the Colorado Grain Chain Board, and he's doing insane things, starting new businesses during COVID and thriving at it. He started the milling company during COVID, and he just told me he's about to start another bakery, which I don't understand how that's working, but Andy can tell you more about how it is. All right, well, let's go in the order of Nana first, and take it away, Nana.
Okay, I will try and screen share. Hello, everyone. This movie really says it all. I don't think I have to say so many things, but I think for all of us in this grain work, it's really the heart that matters the most. And I capitalize that word because it's the connections and the relationships that we have been able to formalize through things like Grain School and so many other grain chain events across the country and probably the world. I wanted to share a little bit what has come about with Grain School. As you've heard me say in the film, it started out of a food service transition and a commitment at the university to serve better food and more local food. And so we were trying to find more local Colorado grain. We found quinoa and millets, but not so much the heritage and ancient wheats that we wanted. And so the initial phase, as you can see in 2016, we were small, 30 people, and we expanded to about 250 in 2020. But we started with grain trials, and I think for me it was a real journey into the agricultural side of it, and learning about these variable grains and how to plant them and how to work with them. At the same time, at the university, we started an educational initiative called SWELL, Sustainability, Wellness, and Learning. And that was really marked with many changes in our recipes and our menus, and integrating more grains and beans and making everything a little bit more sustainable, healthier, but also delicious. So we didn't want to lose that aspect, and working with Menus of Change and the Culinary Institute on those things. This was also in 2017, 2018 was marked by Slow Food and our wonderful event in Denver, Slow Food Nations, where we were able to bring the grain chain and grain literacy with kind of this hands-on experience for families, children, and people closer. And I think that had a big impact on how I viewed how we would need to do this outreach and education. And slowly after that, in 2018, 2019, we were successful with getting some grants, mainly through the collaboration with Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, getting USDA funding for the Colorado grain chain. So initially it was grain trials, learning about it, and then literacy and seeing how these students on a campus were inspired, and then understanding that there's something bigger here, the economic prosperity of, and actually the economic survival of these grains is probably the most significant work that we could do. And so the Colorado Grain Chain, as a business-to-business organization, was founded in 2019 during Grain School 2019. With that, I think it was also important for us to not lose sight of rural communities and keeping this movement really to place. And so we received additional funding from the Colorado Family Gates Foundation for working with corn. And we thought that corn would be more culturally sensitive to the Southern Colorado region, and a tortilla project was started. And now in 2020, we were successful in getting a farmers market promotion grant to really expand these markets of Colorado grown grains to get them to grow more, and also more makers for value-added products. So there were many collaborators along the way, initially with Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance, and they're still going with their Heritage Grain Trial project. And so if anybody's interested in trialing that, there's definitely a good seed library there. But there were many others, and particularly it always started with the ingrained call from the farmers, and really starting this movement with agriculture. And so in 2016, it was the farmers in our Southern Colorado region that called on UCCS to take the leadership of this ARC Watershed Grain Project. I had really no idea what I was getting myself into, but I have to say, thinking about it and working in it now, it's the most beautiful thing that has ever happened in my life. And so it becomes that community outreach that makes it so wonderful. But note in these three goals that we had, it's certainly boosting this regionalized grain value chain, but also we wanted to make sure that this happens sustainably and regeneratively through principles of regenerative agriculture with grains and beans and polycultures and rotational growing. We learned a lot from different farming communities, from organizations such as the Land Institute, the Bread Lab and Breeding, Colorado State University, now a new partner of Grain School, as well as the Europeans in terms of the ancient wheats. So it wasn't that we had the knowledge. We actually invited so many people to gain more knowledge. And that was the most significant, I think, for me, that I always realized that there was more that I didn't know, that I needed to gain more knowledge from other people. And my background is nutrition and health. And so it was really important for me to to revolutionize and re-envision how we teach nutrition and how we teach grains and why that is important. So I've mentioned kind of the progression of the field trials to launching the Colorado Grain Chain, the Corn Biodiversity Project that's ongoing now in southern Colorado, and then the Colorado Grain Chain expanding markets of Colorado-grown heritage grains and whole grains, and making these value-added products, which is really an economic importance for farmers. And I think, as we're hearing, bakers become millers, farmers become maltsters and brewers, and so there's some vertical integration, but ultimately, economically, the system works together because people are working together. Since 2020, we launched Grain School online, and we will hold our first Grain School in the field with more hands-on learning in 2021, which is actually this fall in November down here in Pueblo. But I think we all realize that there is so much to know about these wonderful grains, and they're all ancient. They date back thousands of years, and they have our ancestry. Basically, they were grown on lands of the indigenous people, and so perhaps they are also sacred, but they teach many, many things, and they are nutritionally rich, and they change as we are processing them and fermenting them or sprouting or malting them. And so the science behind all these grains and their processing approaches is just immense, and it is changing by the day. The articles on gluten, on FODMAPs, on various ways how to malt and what sprouting does, and how freshly milled flour changes dough outcomes. It's just really amazing. It's overwhelming at times. For us in nutrition, the most important is that we keep our flours whole and unsifted and unrefined, because it's really in the hull around that, in the bran layer and in the germ where most of the nutrition sits. And so I want to draw your attention to the Bread Lab and this pamphlet of Unsifted that one of our former grad student, Mary Metcalf, put together. And then finally, I think the other piece of this is also that grains have really an important meaning in climate change, and how farmers can shift to more cover crops and diversified crops, including some of the legumes. And we must realize that when we refine grains, the nutrition we get out of that acre is substantially reduced. And so perhaps in the future, it is unsustainable to refine grains. And then climate change will have an impact on production, probably variably across different geographies. But we do know that protein reduction and changes in nutrient content, especially in iron and zinc and other minerals, are going to be significant in grain. So many of these varieties that we are so excited about are going to be utilized, I think, to the benefit of breeders and the benefit of mixing the yield now with blends of nutrition and flavor. And so that collaboration is also significantly important. I think we've seen in the movie enough on how complex it is to get grains from the field, planted, of course, first, then from the field into the combine, then stored, then cleaned. And that requires collaboration and cooperation. And not to speak, from the miller side, also from the farm to the mill to the bakery to the maltster and the brewer. The collaboration is a chain, and I think it has inspired all of us. It's a value chain. In food systems work, also at our university, we have focused on this. And there's a term called food literacy. And critical food literacy is really where a student or a young person starts to understand how important it is to learn about the social cultural aspect of the food chain and the environmental impact of the food chain. And so by diving more deeply into this value chain and becoming part of the value chain for all of us and young people, they start to become better food citizens, basically. And in this case, it's grain citizens. So for the time of grain school, 5 years now, we've really learned to observe these students and how they transform through food literacy and the stages of food literacy into grain citizens. And mind you, these are nutrition students. They have great nutrition literacy, great basic food literacy. They know everything about metabolism and diseases and how to, help people with dietary issues. But they have a lot to learn in food. So this is an important aspect of changing how we think about food and finding solutions that work for us. Like Wendell Berry mentioned, that we find solutions first privately, and then we know that they are solutions and we offer them publicly. So Slow Food Nation has really been a wonderful partner for us to showcase this grain chain and bring in people to taste and to learn, to thresh and winnow. And so we're very happy to announce that this Slow Food Nation's experiment is now moving into the Grain Chain Roadshow, and we're happy to launch that hopefully this year, 2021, at the Chili Fest in Pueblo, Colorado. As you've mentioned, Andrew, I think we are very concerned about this movement being just for a few and not for everyone. And so we have a long ways to go, and yield is important. We can't neglect yield apart from flavor and nutrition. And I would add texture to this, because if you have never made a cookie with whole grain flour only, and then you make that, you will just be amazed by the texture besides the flavor and higher nutrition that you're gaining. And finally, I just wanted to mention our new model here for Grain School. We're online now, and we have these free forums. The next one is March 6th coming up here, and we have 3 courses for community members to join in the academic course. And so if you are interested in learning more this year, we take time. And that's what is required for working with these grains, taking time to learn and explore and taste and make fermented things. It's good for us and good for the microbiome. For more information, go to the coloradograinchain.com. And I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you, Andrew, for putting this together.
Thank you, Nana. Jeremy
I want to jump on real
is...
quick, Andrew, and just remind everybody that the Colorado Grain Chain, or the Grain School, has a booth in the expo. So after the event is over, I just didn't want to forget to say that. So be sure and go to the expo and check out their booth, which has all kinds of information and a bunch of other links in there as well.
And up next is Jeremy. I am looking for Jeremy. There he is.
Amazing.
Hi. Low volume from you.
Okay, that should be better. No?
I hope. Well, it's people will just have to turn their volume up. That's all.
No.
That
should be okay. Is that okay? Because it was fine before. I mean.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, good. Right, let's go. First of all, I want to say thank you very much to Andrew for inviting me to do this talk, and also to Alison McGill for helping us out with the technology. If things go wrong, it's not her fault or Andrew's. I'm going to blame the technology squarely. It's a new system for me. It looks good, and I hope it just keeps working. I'm going to give you a quick overview of grain chains. Europe's probably going a bit far. It'll mostly be about the UK and a little bit about France and Italy. It's a little hard to know where to start, and I was kind of terrified to see that Andrew Whitley is in the audience, because that's where I'm going to start. In the mid-1970s, Andrew quit his job with the BBC and moved to the northwest of England to start what was called the Village Bakery in Cumbria. Many people said, what on earth is the point of a village bakery when there's almost no customers around? But Andrew proved them very wrong. using mostly organic English wheats, and after another visit, after a return visit to Russia, he was in the Russia service. Andrew, I hope you'll correct me on all this if I get any of it wrong. But after a return visit, started working with sourdough, and probably was the first, and certainly was the first person to get a real sourdough into English supermarkets. In 2009, he moved away from the village bakery, moved to Scotland, started an organization called Scotland the Bread, which is a social business owned by the members. They undertake small-scale milling. They sell wholesale and retail. I'm going to come back to the flowers at the end. And of course, they were teaching courses in the use of local grains, the use of whole grains, the use of sourdoughs. And that sort of spread the word. And I think more than anything else, inoculated the whole country with the culture of small grains and the idea of revitalizing a local grain chain. The next sort of really important step, I believe, is Kimberly Bell. Kimberly had opened a place called the Small Food Bakery in Nottingham. And her entry into grain chains was inspired by a bag of flour. Again, I'll come back to talk about the flour later, but Kimberly says, you know, local is, for England, for the UK, local is the whole place. And that matters because she's in Nottingham. Probably think maybe of Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham, which is kind of in the middle of England. And so everywhere is just about the same distance for her. And it was Kimberly who worked on how to turn this specific batch of flour into a decent bread. And she's continued to work with that. And it's now about, I think she was telling me last week, 35–40% of her market is this particular flour. She launched the UK Grain Lab in 2017, inspired mostly by Stephen Jones and the Bread Lab at Washington State. And she, like all of you, I think, like all of the grain chains, she brings together farmers, millers, bakers, shoppers, maltsters, brewers. And as a result of that, that first UK Grain Lab catalyzed the formation of a whole lot of smaller regional grain labs. And together they're building local networks, local economies. Probably the weakest link in all this at the moment is milling. There are some older mills, windmills, water mills. Some of those are being restored specifically to work with newly emerging local grain alliances. Some new ones are being bodged together from bits and pieces that are lying around the English countryside. But most of the new mills are coming in from Germany, from Austria, from France. Kimberly told me that some of the marvelous new American mills are expected soon. So I haven't gone into any great detail in any one of these, local grain initiatives. Europe is very similar. There tend to be more or less formal umbrella organizations. So in Italy, there's an organization called Rete Semi Rurale, which is the network, a rural seed network. In France, there's a thing called the Réseau Semences Paysannes, the network of peasant seeds. Peasant, I have to tell you, of course, has very little pejorative sense in Europe. UK, I think peasant is still a bit of an insult, but never mind. All of those, and they tend to be networks of networks, rather like the UK Grain Lab has established these other regional grain labs. And generally, they're very small scale. They're built on personal relationships. They're very integrated, so most people along the grain chain know one another. The grain tends to be grown by organic farmers, or at least low input. And the focus is very much on human health, environmental health, social equity. And this is, I mean, I think this is something Nana was saying earlier, that when you start to work in a local economy, those personal connections, the heart, if you will, the relationships, tend to drive everything. And that's very similar to all the other grain chains I know around the world. So what then is the big difference? Well, I think actually the big difference is in the types of wheat that are being used, certainly in the examples I'm most familiar with. Some grain chains are definitely looking at old and local wheats. I mean, Scotland have resurrected, Scotland the bread has resurrected 3 varieties, Hunters, Rouge d'Ecosse, and Golden Drop. I think they're all 19th century. I think that's right. They all do well in the local environment. They've been bulked up, they've been selected. I think they're now being grown as a mixture. Those are old varieties. In Wales, they're resurrecting a Welsh variety called Hen Gymro, which is very well adapted to deal with the wetter environment that they have in Wales. France, lots and lots of interest in local old varieties. My favorite story of those is a variety called Touzel. In 1482, Louis XI was taken ill at Tours in France, and he called for some Touzel wheat, which only bread made from Touzel wheat would set him on the road to recovery. Touzel is grown near Nîmes. Parenthetically, Nîmes is where denim comes from, Serge de Nîmes. Anyway, that's about 650 kilometers away on modern roads on the French Riviera. And in the late 1990s, a French farmer down there near Nîmes got interested in Touzel. He found 4 samples in his local gene bank. He grew them up slowly. 2008, he ended up with a couple of hectares, which is now being grown quite widely, sold very locally. Italy, there's an interest in old grains. I mean, the famous one, which you may have heard of, is Sematore Capelli, very famous wheat. It's a pasta wheat, a durum wheat bred in 1915 or so. It's become something of an industrial product now because everybody believes that Sematore Capelli makes the world's greatest pasta. And quite a few people have said to me, you know, if all the wheat marketed as Sematore Capelli were actually grown in Italy, there'd be no room for anything else. So I take that with a pinch of salt. And of course, there's the Italians growing a lot of the ancient hulled wheats, farro, the mixture of spelt, pine corn, and dinkel. Anyway, so there is an interest in old wheats. There is an interest in heritage wheats. But I think certainly in the UK and also in Italy, there's a lot of work with modern wheats, but they're not the modern wheats of industrial breeding. These are modern wheats created for modern local grain chains. The one that inspired Kimberly Bell at the Small Food Bakery was bred by a marvelous man called Martin Wolf. I had the pleasure and honor of working with him 15, 20 years ago. The one in Italy is mostly bred by a man called Salvatore Ceccarelli, who worked at ICADO, which is the International Center for Agricultural Research in the Dry Areas, used to be in Syria. And both of them created what are called evolutionary populations by crossing tens of varieties, each with the other, in Martin Wolf's case, or hundreds of varieties, 256 varieties in Salvatore Ceccarelli's case. They created these populations that have immense diversity, and small farmers are working with those because they have the capacity to evolve. Firstly, they evolve in the sense that year by year, because they're diverse, different individuals in these modern bred land races perform well. So the yield is actually more stable from year to year. The yield is also higher after just 3 or 4 years of selection. The yield is higher than many modern wheats, certainly on organic farms. And because they're diverse, they confer resilience to pests and diseases. You don't get an epidemic sweeping through. They are a challenge. They're a challenge for millers. They're a challenge for bakers. Kimberly Bell says that's one of the reasons she loves them, because every batch is different. You have to learn to work with each batch. She told me that the same harvest from 2 different millers can come out differently. And there's one overriding problem. I'm not going to go into detail, but we in Europe are blessed with an appalling legislative system which requires varieties to be distinct, uniform, and stable. And these modern bred land races are not distinct. Well, they may be distinct, but they're certainly not uniform, and they're designed not to be stable. So the real problem at the moment for small grain chains who want to use these modern bred land races is they're not allowed to sell them. They're not allowed to sell seed. They're not really allowed to sell flour. And that's the issue that we face here in Europe. It may change in the UK if they take advantage of Brexit and having left the European Union. It may change in Europe, at least for organic farmers. But at the moment, that's the biggest problem. I'm going to stop there. Thank you again, Andrew. I'll take questions later on, or we can talk further later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And next up is Tristan Noyce. And let me bring you in. Wonderful.
Hello, everybody. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for hosting this incredible event, to Slow Food USA and Seed Summit. I'm going to take a little bit of time to share some of the amazing efforts that have gone on across the Northeast grain economy, and share a lot about the community. I think it lost my screen there for 1 second. The community of folks who are helping to make this incredible change. I'm going to show you some images. We had some trouble showing the PowerPoint for whatever reason with my computer when we tested it out, so I'm going to show some images in just a moment. But before I did that, I wanted to sort of start with an overview. We're going to talk a lot about some of the efforts that the Maine Grain Alliance has been endeavoring upon to help restore heritage and landrace seed varieties, connecting with seed savers across the Northeast, but also all across the world in places that are of similar climates to the kind of unique conditions that we experience here in the Northeast, and specifically in Maine, and even more specifically in northern Maine, where much of the grain that's grown in the Northeast is grown. But to help kind of set the stage, I wanted to share a little bit about the origins of the Maine Grain Alliance, and then explain how we got to be involved in the projects that we're involved in now. If you wanted to go all the way back to sort of the seed being sown for our initial efforts, a pioneering group of folks in 2002, led by a baker and a farmer from northern Maine, the bakers from southern Maine, got together and started talking about how local grains could once again re-enter have the ability to be able to be used in this gentleman's bakery. And so those conversations started, and the farmer, whose name was Jim Williams, is one of the founders of Borealis Breads. Jim Williams is the founder of Aurora Mills, and they partnered with Matt Williams of Aurora Farms, partnered with Jim Amaral of Borealis Breads, and thus Aurora Borealis came together, and these conversations started. Borealis was able to start to learn and from the use of the local grains that were being stone milled on the farm where Matt had been able to sort of outfit a barn that was nearby his farmstead. And from that, much was learned, and Matt was kind enough to be able to start to share those learnings out with the agricultural community. And Jim, the baker, was kind enough to start to share those out with the baking community. And in 2007, a group of individuals who were interested in helping to re-energize the community activists gathered around a kitchen table in central Maine in Skowhegan and started a conversation about how they could tide the region's agricultural past that was largely attached to grain growing and help to address sort of a need within the state and moreover the region to support the efforts of folks to help recapture some of the grain that was being grown for specifically in the state for feed purposes and be able to activate more uses and higher value uses along sort of the value chain. The result of that was an event called the Kneading Conference. And I'm gonna see if I can share my screen here and start to talk a little bit about some of the images that I want to share. Just one second. There we go. All right. So I'm going to show it in this format, and hopefully we'll be able to cascade through. As I said, we're going to talk largely about some of the efforts that have come about as a result of this, but really the place that we have to start is at the Kneading Conference. So the Kneading Conference was a gathering of farmers, millers, bakers, maltsters. At the very origins of it in 2007, it was held in a church parking lot. We had a largely baking focused group of people, but we were surprised about how many folks showed up to the parking lot. And what happened in that parking lot was that these amazing conversations across industries started to percolate. That led to these types of discussions. Well, what kinds of grains are available to us? What does that mean in terms of the availability to have it milled into stone ground flour? Is that possible? Where are the gaps sort of within the processing infrastructure and the within the post-harvest grain handling capacities on farms to be able to make some meaningful change and be able to transition some of the acreage that was already being grown in Maine to be able to be accessed for millers and bakers and brewers eventually down the road. And so these conversations happen largely around tables at during the event. The event started to grow over time, and in 2010 we moved it to the Skowhegan State Fairgrounds in Maine, which is the home of the oldest agricultural state fair in the country. In 2010, we also found that there was this burgeoning group of individuals who were trying to use more local grains, and these bakers wanted to have a place that they could connect with one another and share their baked goods. So we launched the Maine Artisan Bread Fair. The Maine Artisan Bread Fair now is at the very end of the Kneading Conference. The Kneading Conference brings together hundreds of folks across roughly in a normal year in person, about 60 different types of workshops from all different types of grain education, largely baking, but also we've done and continue to do home brewing experiences with brewmasters who are using local grains, tours of the local mills, tours of farms, tours of our seed restoration, and then it culminates in the Maine Artisan Bread Fair, where we have about 60 or so vendors who are selling their breads and accoutrements and all the good stuff in between. So again, those conversations around the table led to conversations about was able to decide to help fulfill one of the missing pieces of processing infrastructure and establish a large-scale mill. At the same time, that was called Maine Grains. At the same time, the expansion of Matt Williams' milling operation, which is Aurora Mills, began to happen. And shortly thereafter, conversations among folks who wanted to help provide local processed malt began. So in short order, from the time of the founding of the Maine Grain Alliance to about 2014, we had the sort of expanding growth of 2 regional mills and 2 malt houses. But that wasn't the only thing that we were having conversations about. We were having conversations about oven building and how could we use the resources that oven builders have to be able to start conversations about local grain networks. And use it as an access point. The brewing community became much more involved, and one of our supporters, Allagash Brewing Company, made a commitment to sourcing over the period of 5 years 1 million pounds of locally processed grain for their beers, and they did that by integrating it into their signature beers. This has become now something that many of the Maine breweries are doing. In 2009, there was only about 30, at 150, and many of them, almost all of them, are using local malt that has been grown in Maine. There's a picture of the bread fair. We also began a process of trying to reach out to individuals across our communities to have these conversations about why regional grain economies matter, why supporting your local farm who's growing the grain for local mills and malt houses, why that's important. And an easy way to do that is by taking your show on the road and making pizzas with those, with those products. It's a good place to start. So we were able to secure funding from a number of different grant sources to purchase a mobile pizza oven. This is an oven that was built right in Skowhegan, Maine, by very talented oven builders, one of the founders of our nonprofit, the Maine Grain Alliance, which incidentally was a spin-off, had eventually formed as a result of all of these conversations into a formal entity in 2010. We were able to sort of secure a whole kind of slew of different pieces of equipment that allowed us to have these conversations across a lot of different types of people. That included a series of small-scale to focus on an area that we thought was very important for a number of reasons to maintain, which was the preservation of landrace varieties of grain, heritage grains, and also being able to offer and protect some of the seed varieties that these incredible seed savers from all across the world really have been keeping alive in their backyards, sometimes in their large-scale gardens, sometimes on their farms. But we wanted to be able to create a program that would allow for us to take these handfuls of carefully kept seed and be able to share them with farms to make them into commercially viable quantities. So to do that, we needed to have some ways to access the small amounts of seed over time, intentionally grow them out, and then share that seed with farms. So what you're looking at right now is a small seed drill that can be put on the back of a pickup truck to be moved to different sites. We were able to it's just a ride along, kind of looks like a hat contraption a little bit, but it can harvest about an acre and a half a day of small scale plots and bags it right into burlap bags. It can also turn into a standalone thresher that we can move around to different seed plots that we've set up. We were able to get small scale cleaning equipment to process and to clean out the weed and vegetative matter that gets inside of it. We were able to get ways to dry down some of this work, the solar bubble dryer. That is one of the kind of pieces that we can fold up again and put in the back of a pickup and go and share. Suffice it to say, this is another thresher that we were able to secure. We've been able to then connect across all these conversations, identify varieties that we think would be really well suited for Maine's growing environments, and allow us to be able to grow those seed varieties out in a way that makes it so we're not only protecting sort of the history and the landrace varieties, just being able to grow some varieties that are from, for example, Central and Northern Europe, that are well suited to our wetter conditions and cooler temperatures. Here's an image of where we started to head with that project. In 2013, Richard Roberts, our director of seed restoration, made this a priority, and he has been just an incredible champion of our ability to connect with these seed savers and local farms to grow out these quantities. The process works in a way that as we take just a small handful, we get an exponential amount of that back the next year. We get it in the hands of someone who has the space to be able to grow that out, harvest it again. And then over the course of 3 or 4 years, we have enough that we can share with a farm so that they can purposefully grow it out. And what we ask is that we will give the seed to the farm. 2/3 of the seed is for them to do anything that they like for free. And 1/3 of the seed is then asked to be put back into the grow out operation so that we can continue to grow these amounts over time. We've had a lot of success with some of those varieties, and I'll share what some of those varieties are in just a second. The use of that we've been able to, grain sheaves we've been able to put together and categorize and label. And we've been able to partner with some really wonderful people. This is a picture of buck farms in northern Maine and Mapleton, Maine. And this is a combination seed plot experiment that we partnered with the University of Maine Collaborative Extension to be able to trial a number of varieties that we had within our seed restoration program, and also that the Agricultural Extension had been trialing. The buck farms are a great example of a vertically integrated, piece. It sort of tells much of the story of why this is a unique opportunity for Maine. The bucks come from a potato farming background in northern Maine. There's a lot of potato acreage. They have decided that they wanted to diversify the types of offerings so that the brothers could continue to farm. And what they did is they vertically integrated, created a malt house on their farm premises. They were already growing high quality malting barley. They now malt that on site, and then they're also very collaborative in helping to restore some of these different varieties. I'm interested in the seed aspects of this, and I wanted to share some of the varieties that are within our program before I wrap it up. We have a whole host of different types of wheat varieties. We have hard winter wheats like Cervinta, Banatka, as you see imaged here, Poltavka. We have Rouge de Bordeaux, Goldblum wheat, Indigo wheat, Oland, Harris. These are Harris and Frederick are both softer wheats. But we also have a number of different varieties of Danish seed that we've been able to connect with Anders Borgen and grow out over a period of time. Really exceptional rise. Einkorn, Emmer are part of our program. Here's a picture of the Banatka. Pictures of, this is Black Hulless Emmer. This is Einkorn, as I mentioned. Let's see. Spelt varieties, Italian barley. As I mentioned, Poltavka. Some of these are from Central Europe, Northern Europe. Just giving you all a sense of some of the varieties. We've categorized this. This can be found on our website also, so that if you wanted to see some of the field trial results, you can dive deeper into that aspect of it. But we also gather as a community to do some of this work. This is Flint Corn, which has been a concentration of ours. And in fact, we've been trying to restore some of these shorter varieties of Flint Corn, shorter season varieties of Flint Corn, because we have such low number of days to maturity in Maine. We need to protect those varieties from being lost. And so this is a planting of Byron Flint Corn, which has been in Maine for a long period of time, but we've been helping to grow that out, and that's many of our board of directors who are involved in that work. The last thing I'll say is a number of the folks that are have been mentioned previously have been involved in our Kneading Conference over the years, and we're about to make our announcement next week that we will be hosting the Kneading Conference virtually with the opportunity to maybe do some hybrid workshops. But Kimberly Bell, who's been mentioned a number of times, was our last in-person keynote. And some of you maybe know Sarah Owens and Peter Reinhardt, Richard Miskovich are folks. But we're going to announce that this year, Muhi Community Association and one of the founders of Liberation Farms, who's been doing incredible work on the seed restoration of an African Flint Corn variety, is going to be our keynote. And we are just super excited about that. And I'm excited to continue these conversations, and hopefully you can take some of that away from it. Andrew?
So much, Tristan. I should mention that a couple of things real fast. One is that the Maine Grain Alliance was a big inspiration for, it is a big inspiration for a number of other grain hubs, grain chains in the country, including the Colorado grain chain that I'm associated with, and that some of our other panelists are associated with, including Mona Esposito, who is up next. And I just wanted to acknowledge something that it should be obvious to anyone who's watching, is that much of what we're talking about is focused on wheat and barley and other predominantly European grains. We recognize that we really ought to, the Colorado grain chain is working on its own to focus more on other grains, including sorghum and millet and maize and quinoa and fonio. But it's a reflection of where this is coming from in terms of the geographic point of origin of this discussion. But we want to connect more with folks around the country and around the world to learn more about and do what we can to bring more non-European grains to the United States and to Europe, for that matter. Okay, well, let's start. Mona.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Great to be on the panel. I was having some technical difficulties, so hopefully y'all can hear me just fine. I'm going to approach this from the point of view of the consumer. My role in the Colorado grain chain and in creating a local grain movement. And I say I'll be approaching it from the consumer point of view because that's really how I came to the movement. I was a homebred baker for over 15 years now, and about 5 years ago, I really I had this aha moment where I realized that I really had a lack of knowledge about the main ingredient in the bread that I was baking, which was the wheat. I thought I was doing all I could. I had organic King Arthur bread flour. I thought I was checking off all the boxes. And then I started to hear these stirrings about what was happening in other parts of the country, about the revival of these heritage and ancient grains and locally sourced grains. So everything, that Tristan was just talking about in Maine and with New York City Green Market Grains, North Carolina, Anson Mills, in California, Arizona. And I was like, okay, I want to bake with these grains. And I want to be able to source them locally. So, at the same time, my background has always been that I've always been eager to develop relationships with the growers of my food. And I have been really lucky to be in Boulder, Colorado, these last 13 years, where we just have incredible resources in terms of local growers, really within a very, very close radius. So, our food really doesn't have to travel that far. So I had already developed relationships with farmers just by being a consumer at the farmers market. And when I started, looking at what's happening in other parts of the country, I thought, well, maybe we could, this could be something that could happen in our community. And, at the same time, what's really interesting about the way these sort of local grassroots things develop is that you find it's not very linear. You find that there's all these satellites of activity and things going on that, once you start asking questions and digging a little bit deeper, you realize that actually, that there is this momentum happening and there is this support. Just to give an example, when I first started, looking at how we could get our farmers here in Boulder County to start growing these grains, I needed to find seed. And so because I was connected to the restaurant world and the chef world, I was able to have a conversation with Glenn Roberts from Anson Mills. And Glenn said, oh, there's somebody near you growing this turkey red in Kansas, Stevens Land and Cattle, you should give him a call. And I was like, okay. So I called him up and I'm speaking with Demetria and I'm like, we want to get this rolling in our community. We're connected to farmers. They have the motivation, the interest, and we want to give seed to the growers. And she said, well, where are you? I said, well, I'm in Boulder. And she said, well, actually, I come to Boulder all the time. My partner lives there. And, we've been selling grain to Andy Clark at Moxie Bakery. So, unbeknownst to me, Andy was already implementing using these grains in his bakery, these heritage grains. And so, I met Demetria Stevens at Moxie Bakery for the first time. So all these little things, these connections started popping up. Same thing with Nana. Nana had just had the first grain school and realized there was a need to bring back these varieties as well, and was starting to trial grains. But she was really concerned about the market end of it. So we had connected at a meeting for the Chefs Collaborative organization to try to develop a survey, a market survey. Basically, if we grew these grains, would anybody want them? So, it's this idea, and Andy and I talked about this a little bit about, we were all all these smoke signals were being sent up here and there, and somehow we were all getting connected. And so that, I think that so I've been involved really from the just like the title of this panel, grains is seed and food, from the seed aspect of it all the way to the consumer end of it. Another farmer that's also a chef and really has kind of closed the loop on farming and food farm to table, Eric Skokan, he has always called me the connectress. So I have found that my greatest strength and contribution to this whole movement has been to connect the links of the chain and to build relationships, as Nana said. And that's really, that's where you start. You start with community and building relationships. And so I feel like that's how I came to it as a consumer. And now my role has sort of come full circle over the last 5 years in my latest reincarnation as the grain lady, I, really work with the consumers and to educate and to get people excited about heritage grains and their amazing flavor and the nutritional value, and really, help them understand how these grains can shine. And that's it.
All right, you're done. You're amazingly under schedule.
Yes, well, I was trying to compensate for some over, so
Thank
now we
you.
should be
And
good.
for those of you who are interested, you'll see more of Mona during our workshop demo, and she'll be talking more about whole grains in the home kitchen. So you haven't heard the last of her. All right. So
Thanks, Andrew.
next up is Andy Clark. Andy, are you there?
There he is. Can you hear me, Andrew?
Can hear you, yes.
All right. I'm going to chew up a little bit of Mona's time here with a musical intro, because I'm going to ramble, and then you're going to cut me off at the end, and I'm going to not have a chance. So here we go. This is a little quiet moment to everybody can refocus here for a minute. And grain, the breaducation and grainiac knowledge sort of seep in to your noodle.
That was wonderful. Andy, if I might eat a little bit of Mona's time as well. I just wanted to say to everybody, yeah, applause. I want to say, if folks who are watching, if you recall when Andy was being interviewed, his passion is split between the wheat and the baking and community. And if you ever have a chance to come to Louisville, Colorado, or Boulder, Colorado, you'll see what we're talking about. His bakery is wildly popular, and the demand for their bread, but not only for their bread, but also for the company of hanging out at his locations is very high. I'll get off now. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. What a huge honor to be on this panel with so many mentors and friends. Jeremy Sherfus, I listened to his podcasts. His voice is a zen sound. I hope that Jeremy writes a book one day, because his depth of knowledge in so many very, very particular topics, including grain and bread and historical context of grain as food and bread as food, is stunning. So if you haven't checked out his podcast, eatthispodcast.com. So I am the chairman of the Colorado Grain Chain, conveniently located on my wall in a poster. And there's been quite a bit of dialogue about that today. We are a nonprofit that is seeking to reconnect local Colorado farmers with older wheat varieties and encourage regenerative farming of them, and specific to family-owned farms. So we're really trying to get behind the little guy that have been largely pushed out with the commoditization of our food system and our cherished wheat grain. But today I want to talk about my journey as a bread baker, and I guess as a community builder a little bit. So Mona talked about meeting Demetria Stevens on my front porch and getting some turkey red wheat. I had a funny experience when I was building my little bakery almost 6 years ago. I was getting a lot of my material from a local architectural salvage yard, and I just kept filling up my truck with, old refrigerators and tile and grout and, 2x4s. And the manager, Brandon, said, what the heck are you doing with all this crap? And I said, well, I'm building a bakery, and he said, oh, bakery, my girlfriend grows this very unique type of wheat. Maybe you'd like to try it. And I said, yeah, well, what is it? Well, it's called Turkey Red. I said, yo, Turkey Red for sure. I'd love to try some. Got a sample. And Andrew, I'm setting my timer here. Hold on, because I'm just going to ramble into the distance. Got a sample. It worked great. We started using it. The Dimitri and Bryce Stevens live about 4.5 hours from our bakery, just over the border of Kansas. And to this day, he shoots me a text and says, hey, I'm going to visit my girlfriend, Demetria, next weekend. How much wheat do you need? And I always say, as much as you can fit in your Chevy Silverado. And he comes back 3 days later with 1,200 pounds. And so for the first 2 years of Moxie, that was our exclusive source for whole grain. We were using white flour, that what we also call the devil's flour, from another wonderful mill in Kansas, but we grind our whole wheat in house. And so for the first 2 years, it was exclusively from the Stevens. To back up a little bit, when I was 18 years old, I moved to Boulder, Colorado, and got hired at a little bakery called Daily Bread. Daily Bread was a wonderful, magical place filled with amazing local wheat and wonderful artisans and creative. Bakers are a really, really jovial bunch for the most part, and we had an amazing time nerding out on bread and grain. This is the, I guess, mid 90s. Whole Foods Market rolled into town like a tornado in 96 and bought our bakery and said, hey, we'd like to take a few of you guys and stick you in a in-store bakery in a grocery store. And so we did, and that happened, and we sort of went on kicking and screaming. And then after a few years, started to kind of, fall in love with actually a lot of the structure within Whole Foods and with the philosophy of the boss, John Mackey, and ended up growing with Whole Foods for 15 years, 15 wonderful years, 15 challenging years, and grew a very large commercial bakery for them, and a certified organic bakery. And, I was buying, millions of pounds of flour a year. I was very proud of getting flour from some of the best organic mills in the country. I was also very proud of the price that I would pay, because I was always kind of focused on food costs. So I'd call the mill and I'd say, hey, here we're coming up on our annual contract. Can you tell me your best price? And so I'd get a few different mills that we wanted to work with, and we do a sort of competitive bidding process. And at the end, the person with the best price and quality and service would win. And I remember, my biggest thought when I thought about flour at that time was how much I paid for it, and that it was good and clean and had high food safety and quality specs, good protein, etc. But I would never see the farmers. I would never see the miller except for at a trade show where we'd have a beer and go out and see a concert or something. But it was a transactional relationship, very transactional and kind of cold. It kind of felt like it just wasn't a lot of light and love and color to it. Well, when I get deliveries from Demetria's boyfriend, and their dog jumps out of the car, and catch the dog, and they bring me eggs from their farm and tell me about, you know, kind of some what new stuff's happening on the farm. And we hang out for 2 hours and have coffee and catch up and talk about life and food and what's going to happen next year. What are they going to plant? You know, life suddenly comes into this really full, lush, full color feeling, and it's not transactional. And I take my 3 sons. We drive out to the farm, and we'll show up for harvest. We go out there. About a month ago, we're in this pandemic, and we got a dog, but that's not enough. We need a cat. We can't find a cat anywhere. And I said, wait a second. Demetria's pest prevention program is her 30 cats that she has on her farm, and she's offered them up before when we've been out there. So I called her a couple of weeks ago. I said, hey, Demetria, can I still have a cat? She said, oh yeah. You know, she sent me a photo of, you know, a cat that she wanted to recommend. And so, you know, it's, there's a relationship there. The wheat changes every year. It was interesting when you're only using a single farmer from a single variety of wheat, in each crop year and transitioning over, as I think Sophie said in Andrew's video, you know, there's a lot of variability there, and it adds joy to the baking process, and it reinvigorates your connection to the food. So, you know, when I was working in big bakeries, you know, you kind of you scale your flour and your salt and your sourdough, you stick it in the mixing bowl with some water, and you hit start, and when the timer goes off, 8 minutes later, your dough's done. Well, you don't do that with this type of wheat. You put your ingredients in the mixing bowl, and you carefully watch, and you say, oh, I think it needs a little bit more water, or geez, I better, you know, mix it a little bit more and develop the protein a little bit more, the gluten a little bit more. And you're really connected to that process. So it's a beautiful thing. It has slowed down my relationship with bread, because it got my relationship with bread got really fast. And, you know, we're trying to put the wonder back in bread, as it were, putting the wonder back in bread. Moving on, check my timer here. Oh, plenty of time. When I was at grain school 3 years ago, Nana Meyer's grain school, which is it is the, you know, the Woodstock of wheat, the relationships that have been formed there. That's where I met Tristan. That's where I met James Brown of Barton Springs. My first time there 3 years ago, on Sunday morning, Nana had a gentleman present from the Hopi, a Hopi farmer, and his presentation was partly on corn and his relationship to corn, and my relationship to corn up until that day had been driving through Iowa and Kansas and Colorado and Nebraska and falling asleep to corn after 7 hours of driving through the same cornfield in Iowa, you know, dying to find a cup of coffee somewhere. Corn did not impress me. Corn represented high fructose corn syrup, ethanol, devastation of rural farm life, family farm life. Nothing about it represented anything positive to me until the day I saw, I want to say his name's Gerald, a Hopi farmer, present what corn meant to him. And in his presentation, he showed these beautiful ears of corn that ranged from, you know, flat little white corn to, you know, blue and purple to multicolored corn, and the sheer physical attributes and beauty of the color and the look of the corn and all the different varieties that don't just look like you would expect. Some of these are very, very different and strange looking, like underwater creatures. And then he talked about his tribe's relationship to the corn And these guys are planting corn with a digging stick on a hard dirt plain, and they're planting corn with squash and beans, the three sisters, and they're planting them bush corn in fairly large row spacing. These guys and gals walk the corn every day and every night. They dance in the corn, they sing in the corn, they have celebrations in the corn. Their ancestral origin story speaks to their people actually coming from corn. So when I think about how we've managed to really screw corn up here in America, I now think about the million different ways we can enjoy different native corns. And so that actually is part of our Colorado Grain Chain, one of our initiatives this year, similar to what the Maine Grain Alliance has done, of focusing on these indigenous corns. Andrew, am I up?
Any parting words or?
I would, the last thing I would like to say is it's funny because, similar to Mona, once I started to look deeper into the main ingredient of my career and my love affair for bread, when I started to look more deeply into wheat and discover the hundreds of different varieties of wheat that existed, I became very passionate about certain varieties, partly influenced by this non-celiac gluten sensitivity issue we have, certainly in North America, where something about our wheat is just not jiving the human body. And in discovering that, heirloom wheats can sometimes not have those disruptive attributes and inflammatory responses. So I have just dove deep into the old school, deep into the pool of these old wheats, not to condemn any new wheats or any of the great work that's being done out there all over the world. So I look forward to a future chapter in my book when I can find the time of exploring healthful wheats that are high yielding and newly adapted varieties.
Okay, well, thank you. And I want to invite all of the panelists to come back on screen now, and we'll let you back in. And before turning it over to the panel, I'll pose some questions to all of you from that we've been getting in the chat. But I just wanted to follow up. I've been reading the chat as things go along here, and it was really heartening to hear the reaction to the idea of community and its relevance to grain chains, and I think that's so important because it's two sets of relationships, and they're definitely not mutually exclusive. It's the relationships among growers and producers, but it's also relationships among producers and consumers. And there are two types of communities, and I think Andy's presentation indicated just how important his relationships are with other links in the chain, like growers and also folks who are well, there are a number of other people involved on the producer's side. I'll remind you, in the film there was a final clip that showed Sophie Williams, the small baker in Bellingham, Washington. And in Washington, she runs a commissary bakery. She shares a kitchen with a number of other people. And one of the things that she talks about at the very end, where she reads from her newsletter that she produces, and I highly recommend that you follow her on Instagram. She's brilliant. And she talks about her fantasy of having her own bakery, and the people who are she works with, and the people who come to the bakery, and that notion of it's a fantasy about community and how bringing people together is important. So I just thought I'd mention that. And now to shift to questions. An important, challenging one for all of you, and I invite any of you or all of you to respond to it. From Fina Borgeson, who asks, so is anyone later today going to address the accessibility gap? How low income people in urban areas and in communities where land is so expensive that grain is no longer grown can obtain more healthful grains and flours. You know, I guess I'll direct this first question to Nana because I know she thinks about it a lot, and I think all of the panelists do. And we've heard for the panelists the discussions about what's called the approachable loaf. Is one manifestation of trying to figure out how to make grain and bread more affordable for people. But Nana, why don't you go ahead and respond?
The first thing that I would like to say is that we should you know, embrace all whole grain because it's all very healthy. So we all have access, and very easy access, to whole grain and whole grain flour. That is just the whole grain, whether it's, you know, a more modern variety or an older variety. Nutritionally speaking, there are a few differences. Some are stars, like einkorn is a star. And certainly there are nutritional differences, but einkorn also has a 50% lower yield than a modern variety of wheat. So it will always stay an exclusive product. It's also difficult to clean. So I think it's really important to understand that whole grain is accessible in every grocery store, either in the berry or as flour. Rye, wheat, even some other types, spelt is pretty accessible. So when it comes to the regional grains, that is a more difficult question. And so I think the approachable loaf is one way that the Bread Lab has dealt with this. And I think you heard Stephen Jones talking about this importance of breeding and combining the yields and leveraging, and sometimes that's called exploiting the ancient varieties for their, you know, nutritional and flavor qualities, and breeding in this way a more high yielding older variety, a combination of the two. And so it becomes then an easier grain to produce on a larger scale, and farmers, you know, they're looking, of course, for yield. And so it is an easier discussion. From our experience, you know, I think getting people from where they are is an important one, and being culturally sensitive and getting people involved in the value chain. There are many ways, if people really want access, I think there are many ways to get involved, and farmers, you know, desperately need hands on farms. And, you know, the grain chain is a complex one. There's so much to do. And so it is an opportunity, I think, for many people to get involved, but not easy question to solve.
I'm going to put Tristan on the spot and ask him if you and your colleagues at the Maine Grain Alliance have been confronted with this question.
Yes, there's an accessibility question on a number of different levels. I think there's a cost accessibility aspect to using local grains and stone ground flour. There's also an educational aspect to it too, where many talented bakers have not had the opportunity to be able to utilize stone ground flour, which is the most readily accessible type of whole grain flour that you can get in the Northeast. And so there's a barrier to entry for some bakeries on that level too, which is why we try to offer different types of educational opportunities for how to incorporate stone ground and whole grain flours into marketable products. And in fact, we've held over the years workshops on something called the Village Bakery, which is about how can we create sustainable ways from which any place in Maine would be able to use grains in a way that's both whole grains that are grown locally in a way that's sustainable economically and for marketable to folks in communities. And we've had a lot of success with that. We've done a lot of learning from each other. And we've found in a similar way that in the fashion that if it tastes good, that's eliminating one barrier of entry from the beginning. I think the price aspect is always something that has to be considered. Certainly, there are ways that we can make the price decrease, and those are happening actually in Maine right now to some degree. Part of the problem has been that farms don't have the necessary post-harvest grain handling equipment to be able to handle food-grade grains. That can create problems and increase more costs, throughout the chain. We've been part of a large effort with the Maine Technology Institute. It's large for us, at least. We had a $200,000 project to help provide better post-harvest grain handling abilities on 7 farms that are critical to Maine. So if you keep on kind of pulling back parts that are causing and adding extra cost into the end product, you can start to reduce that overall. I do think there's always going to be partly an effort to make sure that it's accessible from a price standpoint, because it isn't playing. I think the more that we invest in our own regional food economies, the greater ability we have to increase accessibility from a cost standpoint.
All right. Unless someone else would like to respond to that question, I have a couple of other good questions that I could pose to the panel and move on. How about if I do that? Unless anybody wants to jump in here.
I would just add in that, with sort of, access to these great regional grains, which is a huge nut for us to crack here in Colorado. One thing that we're trying to do is to get into the school systems and to educate on whole grain consumption, organic, the benefits of organic food, how to make a tortilla or a muffin or a loaf of sourdough at home. And all of those things cost very little money. So you can go buy a hand crank. We have a home hand crank grinder that my 8-year-old uses. He makes pancakes all the time. You can pick up grain for 50 or 75 cents a pound, and you can actually make your own food. So I think education will be a big part of that.
Okay, I'd like to ask, so you're all of the panelists know about Kernza, which is the perennial wheatgrass that's being bred at the Land Institute. And I should also mention that the Bread Lab in Washington State has their own perennial wheat that Steve Jones has been breeding as well. But the question is very curious as to how the panel views Kernza and in any other new intermediate wheatgrass varieties. I know that Andy has worked with.
It bakes and tastes great. I had followed Wes Jackson's work for a number of years and didn't know it had actually made it to a sellable point until I was at a trade show, probably bumping into a transactional relationship for a multi-million-dollar flour contract. And I saw Cascadian Farms had launched a Kernza cereal. And so I immediately called the Land Institute. I got a 10-pound sack of very small. The seed size is very small. It almost looks like a skinny flax seed, but it milled up fine and it baked amazing bread. So flavor is amazing. It's not I had anticipated it being a bit grassy, but it was sort of full flavored, like maybe a hard red winter wheat might be. So we look forward to supporting it. And, it's been 50 years to get this far, and it'll be amazing to see what happens in another 10 or 20.
What, for the sake of panel or attendees who are not familiar with Kernza or perennial wheat, would one of you on the panel like to speak to what the environmental and other reasons are for the concentrated effort to develop perennial wheat? Jeremy, you look like you're ready to speak there.
I could be, yeah. Basically, if you don't have to plow the prairie, it doesn't blow away. Oh, again? What?
Well, keep it going. Let's see how it goes. If you could hold that closer to your mouth, maybe that'll help.
I don't know. Is that helping? I don't understand this. Anyway, yeah. If you don't have to plow the prairies don't blow away. And perennial wheat has a root system that is 6-7 times bigger than a modern annual wheat. It can suck up nutrients from down there. It can hold the soil together over the winter. All sorts of good things. I mean, Wes will talk your ears off about it, but essentially it's to avoid having to plow every year, and even to avoid having to grow a cover crop over the winter and the rest of it. That's the real reason. And the rest of it, I mean, okay, Wes talks about growing granola on the prairies with one pass combine harvesting seeds and grains and everything. I'm not sure about that. That may come. But the big thing about perennial wheat is to avoid plowing as often as you do.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that. I had the pleasure of interviewing Wes Jackson, actually, with Andy about a little more than a year ago. And when we interviewed him, he didn't want to talk about perennial wheat. What he wanted to talk about is polycropping and the importance of the ancient wisdom about agriculture that modern agriculture has ignored by monocrop agriculture, and the importance of what's happening under the ground. So this is something that the Land Institute is actively experimenting with. Nana, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to this topic. Okay. Another question, and it looks like we have time for maybe 2 more questions, this one and another. Are you going to cover, the question posed was, are you going to cover what grain does to the soil? And I'm going to have to rely on Tristan again, but because he's the actual farmer. Andy's a farmer. I'll acknowledge that, but Tristan has been a farmer for longer. And yeah, maybe you could say something about what the effects of grain agriculture are, particularly wheat, I suppose would be most relevant for this discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning, is that I also own a small grain farm in Aroostook County, which is the very tippy top of Maine, up on the crown of Maine. And, we're just talking about some of what grain, can do in the discussion about Kernza. The reason, as some of the folks were just discussing, that Kernza is attractive, among many reasons. One of the most prominent reasons is that it allows for a elimination or a reduction of soil degradation that can be done from tilling. or annual tilling. But by and large, grain is a fantastic way to be able to rotate, especially in the Northeast here, with a number of principal crops that have been grown for a long period of time. I'm technically a 6th generation potato farmer, my brother and I, and that's the largest agricultural crop in Maine and in the Northeast. And with the increasing of rotation years in the potato industry, we've been growing more grain, and that's had a lot of benefits because when you're rotating more often, most folks here probably know a lot of benefits of why crop rotations are important. But what we're finding is that if we're able to create different types of grain products and even pseudo grains, sunflowers, for example, these 4-year sort of rotations in and out of potatoes, or 3-year rotations where it's potato, something else, a grain crop, a sunflower crop. The buck farms that I was mentioning before, what they have found is that, they are growing potatoes, then they were growing different types of grains, wheats and barley for their malt house. On the wheat, undersowing the wheat and with a clover crop, so you're getting added benefits from nitrogen fixation and rotating with yellow peas in off years and creating marketable products for those yellow peas, which is then another legume that's refixing the soil. Sunflowers, I mentioned, is another thing that's being grown in the rotation with the grains now that has this kind of deep taproot that can go down and mine minerals from below where the grain has been typically, taking things out of the soil. So overall, I mean, a healthy transition in crop rotations with grain can help to mitigate and manage your weed bank. It can replenish your soil. It can act as a good, if it's tilled under the green manure aspect of it. All of these things I think are in combination can create really good things. And we also just, one thing to mention is, carbon fixing. Also, there's nothing that can beat a tree. But there's some interesting work that's been done recently. Ellen Mallory presented on this with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension around some of the benefits that grains hold for in that area as well.
Thank you.
And Andrew, I would add one thing from a comment from Sarah Cox. Animal rotations are important to these crop rotations as well. And being a complete fake farmer myself, unlike Tristan, I'm total poser, but I enjoy it. Spent a lot of time on Demetria and Bryce's biodynamic farm, and their bison and wild cattle herd is very, very carefully rotated through their 800 acres, and they're only actually putting wheat on about 150 to 200 acres at a shot, and actually leaving the rest to rest during that time, and working with moisture, looking at what parts of the field are muddy, and making sure that the bison are not out at that time on those fields, and the tilling effect that the hooves of the bison have, and of course the fertility from the stolen, now not stolen, buffalo patties. But the animal part seems to be a very big part as well.
I just wanted to add to that real quick, piggybacking on it. One of the things that we are talking about here is this mutual, symbiotic relationship between all of these things. I mean, we need to be able to have, in my opinion, a strong animal and livestock community enables access to manure locally. Without that, it becomes very difficult from fertility in some aspects. There are ways you can go about doing this, but also when you're growing grain, if you're trying to shoot for malt grade barley, you're not always going to achieve malt grade barley, at least here in the Northeast. And so you need these strong tertiary markets for feed and other things, and they're all mutually reinforcing of one another. So the way the regional food economies work and the regional grain economy works is that it is reliant on all of these other types of industries to be successful. And that's what's beautiful about it too, because when you have them all coming together, they're all helping one another achieve their end goal.
Yeah, that was an important final comment, Tristan. David Shields asked the question in the chat a while back ago, and I didn't pose it to the panel, but I did write a response that we're focused here primarily on culinary uses, but you've just pointed to the need for some porosity between cultivation for culinary uses and for non-human animal uses in order for there to be no waste. And I think we're going to stop here, but just a couple of closing comments. One is that the Stevens Farm in Kansas, they use their bison manure to make, in big vats, manure tea, which they spray on the fields in order to spread in order to spread the whatever microbes are in the bison gut onto the field. So I think that's a very interesting practice that they have. That's typical of biodynamic agriculture. The other thing is that there were quite a few questions in the chat from people who are interested in figuring out how to build grain chains in their areas, or to find out about grain chains in their areas. And I hope that you'll all get in touch with the panelists to ask them more questions, myself included, in order to help you. It's so great to hear that there's that interest. I think we'll stop here, and I just want to thank the panelists. This has been wonderful. Really enjoyed hearing all these wonderful people talk. And I don't even get bored of watching the interviews that I've done on video with them. I keep watching and learning each time I watch. I've got 30 hours of interviews that I've done for that film, and it's eventually the plan is to make it a feature length. But for now, it was great to have all of you included in it. Thank you, and thanks so much, Allison, for making this run smoothly.
You're welcome. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we, as Andrew and I were texting each other while you all were talking, we are going to take about a 10-minute break before we jump into the next session. The next session is actually in you have to go back to the sessions icon, click on that, find I think it's called kitchen baking, or
whole grains for the home kitchen, I think.
Whole grains for the home kitchen. So we'll take a few minutes break, and then we'll see you all over there in Whole Grains for the Home Kitchen. Go back to sessions, and it'll be the active one. If you get lost, go to reception, and it should show up as active on the front page when you enter. So thanks, everybody. Oh, and one other thing I want to say is that a lot of the things that people were posting and the questions people are asking, from week 1, we have this amazing intern from Slow Food USA who has been compiling. Can you play some background music for me? Nice. Compiling all the links and all the sort of thing. And so we will include that on the Slow Food USA webpage, and you can access a lot of these resources and links there. Drop beats, not bombs.